Hey guys, it's Mountain Walk, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about goblins. Yeah, we got some real good news about goblins. They're back. They're back bigger than ever. More of them. They're all over the place. They're fucking crazy. They're going nuts. Obviously, this is all sweet. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about our good green-skinned red friends. So this should be pretty interesting. We're going to be taking a little bit of a look about sort of the history, a little bit of the tribe, and then sort of where we're at today, and what's going on with all of that. So yeah, let's get into it. All right. So what we got here is well, we got some good news. We got a bunch of goblins. You know what? 2019, 2020, been pretty retarded. Pretty retarded. Everything is stupid. Like everywhere, it's just everything just went retarded. But if there's a silver lining to anything, that actually means we got a bunch of good new sweet goblins. So pretty nice. Pretty nice. Um, it's been a long time, quite a while since we got any real good new goblin cards that really revitalized the archetype. So this is pretty cool. You know, I mean, there was like, I don't know, like some like one or two from like the last time we went to Zendikar with the stupid like bushwhacker stuff. It's just like, okay, whatever. This is dumb. This stuff's shitty. Um, but really, it's been a long, long time, very long time, many, many years before we got a good goblin pretty much anywhere. So this is nice, nice change of pace. Um, and you know, the nice thing is, we got some that do a good job. They do jobs um, that the other goblins haven't been able to do. You know, more onboard control, more damage, more artifact destruction, all sorts of things. So this is pretty sweet, and really just in general, just a lot of goblins that make more goblins, right? And these guys just put tons of tokens in, right? Just tokens all over the place, goblins all over the place. Good stuff, good stuff. But yeah, so let's go ahead and look at all that stuff. All right. So uh, there was in the beginning there was some goblins that they printed. There was you know, like Goblin King, Mons Goblin Raiders, Goblin Balloon Brigade, these sort of silly cards. Um, and they're pretty, you know, they were, I don't even want to say they're good for their time. I guess like Goblin King is pretty good. I mean, sort of, but really the original quote unquote Goblin decks were very much so buoyed by Goblin Grenade. 1 mana, 5 damage is pretty, I mean, pretty insane. Obviously, you need to play a fair number of goblins for that to be good, but I mean, Goblin Grenade's like your finisher, so it's not like you need to have, you know, Goblin on turn 2 to Goblin Grenade someone. So, but typically, like, it's always just been kind of a meme tribe, right? Like, when I first started playing Magic around like 2000, I mean, these were just like meme decks. Like, sometimes you kind of had like sly decks with like Goblin Cadets or whatnot, things like that. But they weren't typically, that wasn't really normal because those things were just like a little underpowered, not really what you wanted. I mean, sometimes you play like Goblin Cadets, like in Vintage, of course, but typically, like any Goblin, like strictly Goblin tribal deck was just typically seen as not very good. Like, again, we got a lot of really powerful enablers, but no real good payoffs. So we got, you know, obviously perhaps the most notorious Goblin, which would be Goblin Recruiter. Certainly one of the most silly cards, one of the most silly text boxes ever. Also, again, really great flavor text. All of these goblins have really great flavor text, right? Um, that Goblin Recruiter, of course, a big part of pretty much any broken combos. Again, typically involving goblins, of course. And then other things that like Goblin Charbelcher, which has nothing really to do with goblins, but has Goblin in the name of it. Anyways, Goblin Charbelcher actually played pretty well with Goblin Recruiter back in the day in the quote unquote like Gob Vantage decks and extended, or the Food Chain Goblin decks, or some sort of variation hybrid of both, where you'd obviously just stack your deck with just all your goblins, and then you'd hit them with the Charbelcher for like a gajillion. So, anyways, Recruiter, that was a big one, but when all you're doing is putting like shitty like red creatures or whatever on top of your deck, like it's obviously it's not very good, right? Then of course, after that we get Mog Fanatic and Tempest. This is like perhaps one of the best red creatures for many years, for a very long time, especially when creatures were worse. It could just outright easily kill stuff, and also of course the damage on the stack rules make Mog Fanatic a great card. One of the pretty much about the only Goblin card you'd actually wouldn't be embarrassed to play. It just did so much, killed random stuff, killed a lot of Birds of Paradise and Llanowar Elves. Definitely really great there. And of course, did some beatdown, sacrificed it when your opponent wrathed or kegged or something. So Mog Fanatic, definitely a big player in the Goblin decks, obviously a big player in pretty much any red deck back in the day. But again, not enough really to make a Goblin deck. Again, same thing, we got Lackey and Matron, really powerful, but what are we doing with them? Not really much. And then after that, of course, we have Goblin Ringleader. This was in Apocalypse, and yeah, again, another powerful card, but these cards are all spread out, so of course we'll never be having them all in the same, like, standard, even. And then, of course, in Extended at the time, there was, well, playing a bunch of bad cards to draw more bad cards that, you know, just wasn't really what you're looking for. Definitely, you're still missing some pieces. All right, but in 2002, in the fall of 2002, Onslaught Block was released, and I mean, oh boy, this is great. We got all sorts of good stuff. All right, so first and foremost, we got Skirk Prospector. Now, this thing is a little unassuming, but this is another great one-drop, which is awesome. This let you do all sorts of tricks. Sometimes it would just act as a Lotus Petal, where you could get your War Chief out on turn 2, and then after that you'd like play a bunch of like Pile Drivers or something like that. I mean, Prospector's done so much, especially in the Goblin bidding decks and Standard. You'd be able to sack all your Goblins for a bunch of mana, to trigger a Sharpshooter and then just do silly stuff and then like one-shot your opponent. Pretty sweet. Of course, then we also got Goblin Pile Driver, perhaps the big card that really sort of tied everything together in the beginning, because it's, again, 2 mana, 1/2, which is, you know, not bad, especially for red cards back in the day. Pro Blue, this is great. This is amazing because all the Tog decks were around, so this could block it, could swing through it, and then obviously it becomes a big old fireball, you know, when you attack with a bunch of goblins. So this is a great payoff, really great. And of course, the other really good card from Onslaught would be Goblin Sharpshooter. Again, this is great. This made I made combat pretty much insanely ridiculous, basically impossible for your opponent. And it just dealt a bunch of damage, wiped out all X1s, and especially since like all the triggers go on the stack, you can respond to them and just, I mean, like if you know how, like a little bit better rules knowledge about how the stack works and everything, you can really just go crazy with Sharpshooter and really make combat hell for your opponent. So Sharpshooter, again, another unique effect, another really powerful effect, especially with goblins that want to sack themselves, or, you know, prospector chains and stuff. That it's really cool, really cool. Now in Legions, the next set, all we got really was one card, but it's a doozy. Jim Palm Incinerator. This thing is great. This thing is basically an uncounterable cantripping Terminate, which is pretty good. I mean, I've even cast this card more than a few times. as like a 3 mana 2/1 before. I mean, again, it has another mode, right? So that's pretty awesome. You know, it still pumps Pile Driver, and I mean, God, look at this thing. These Otarian goblins are fucking weird looking, weird as fuck. But the big ones, I mean, well, they're all big, but in Scourge, I mean, we've got two really important ones. First off, War Chief, Goblin War Chief. The thing is great. 3 mana, 2/2, cheapens all your goblins by 1 generic mana, and gives them haste. Now, haste is such an insane ability, absolutely insane. This really, I mean, makes combat very difficult for your opponent, makes tapping out for them very, very poor, because it, you know, it allows you to just completely change the flow of the battle, so to speak. You know, especially with combined with all sorts of other cards, it's just it makes combat math very difficult. You know, especially with stuff like Pile Driver, and you're trying to do all this math and stuff. It's like it's just ridiculous. So this is a very, very good card. It's one hell of a graveyard, right? So it's just, man, War Chief is awesome. And last but certainly not least, Siege Gang Commander. This thing is insane. I mean, this thing's actually seen play basically every time it was in Standard. This has seen play in Red decks because A, this is just so good. It's excellent reach, 5 mana, 5 power, spread over 3 bodies, and you can basically finish someone off with it. You can just attack, and then you can just start chucking things at your opponent's face. It's just great, absolutely great. I mean, you can't. What more can you say about Siege Gang? It was really insane. Like Red had never gotten any sort of creature like this before that was able to really kind of dominate the board in some respects, really give you a ton of reach, a lot of burn. This is awesome. This was really great. So this really propelled the Goblin decks into well, into the stratosphere, really. So in Extended, of course, we got the Food Chain Goblin decks, again with Recruiter. And then later they banned Recruiter, but the deck still existed. You still had Lackey, you still had like Mox Diamond, Ancient Tomb, Food Chain, of course, everything else. So that was really good. And of course, Naturalize had just been printed too, which is really excellent. So it let you deal with Chill and things like that. Of course, unfortunately, that deck was premiered more or less around the same time as like the big Tinker decks did. So it really was never able to show off. So what ended up happening is, well, pretty much got overshadowed. Their tech got leaked too, and like, yeah, obviously they just weren't quite as broken as the Tinker decks for the most part. But yeah, anyways, they went crazy. Obviously very big and Standard, and then also Block too at the time. Very powerful, really great stuff. I remember having so much fun playing these decks. At first I thought it was like a joke, a meme, you know, because it had been for the first couple years, and then like, you know, playing Standard and just like losing to this thing randomly, and it was just like, man, what the fuck's going on? Where'd this come from? Uh, it was definitely crazy, but man, that was, what a sweet deck, right? But perhaps one of, maybe if not the most important card, at least in the modern Goblin decks, really, is Aether Vile. Aether Vile has totally changed the changed the game, really. I mean, the card itself is not just, you know, a Goblins card, but that totally is a build around. And like the amount of mana you can get from it, the amount of combat tricks, let you play your guys with flash, lets you play them uncounterably. This thing produces just tons and tons of mana. I mean, it's one of my favorite cards because it's a great build around. It really creates different, interesting type of games. Very skill testing. I mean, what more can you say about Aether Vile? And it goes doubly so for this deck. Playing Goblins with Aether Vile is very sweet because, again, it gives you all sorts of tricks, combat tricks you can use, like viling in, you know, things like Mog War Marshal or whatnot. Gives you free blocks. I mean, really, like you know, you could do all sorts of tricks. You know, how about end of their turn viling a War Marshal, on your turn viling another War Marshal, and then ticking up to 3 with the ability on the stack. Lots of different tricks, lots of different things you can do. Whether do you keep it on 3, do you go to 4, that kind of stuff. Very, very, very cool. Yeah, definitely one of my favorite cards, and this really like made it really the biggest deck and perhaps the most important deck in Legacy in the first couple of years of the format, and then after that it was just like another good deck. But yeah, it's really good. Really definitely shaped the way that people had to think about playing. I mean, it really basically made pure control decks like super bad for a really long time in Legacy, a really long time, at least probably until Innistrad block. Yeah, it was pretty embarrassing trying to beat Aether Vile. It just wasn't happening. So yeah, this thing was great. Prevented in 2004 in Darksteel. This thing was awesome. I mean, I guess what more can you say, right? This is really a very fundamental, important part of the deck. Again, along with Wasteland and Schadenport. Of course, those cards had already existed for years or whatever, but Aether Vile lets you waste your opponent and port your opponent, but you would always still be able to make progress on board, ticking up Vile and so on. So, yeah. I mean, what else can you say? It's Aether Vile. This is one of my favorite cards, one of the best signed cards, one of the most subtly powerful cards. This thing is great. Absolutely great. All right, and after that, we didn't really get much. Just in general, really. I mean, there's some stuff like, for example, we got Mogg War Marshal. This is, I would say, a very fundamental part of the deck now, and especially when Zoo became a really big deck in Legacy around 2009-ish, 2010-ish, 2009, 2010, yeah, something around there. Mogg War Marshal was one of the only real ways to get ahead, to actually be able to beat the deck, to get a decent sized board. Yeah, War Marshal really great at chump blocking. Also, at that same time, again, we got Sting Scourger. This was not really good. Like, it was fine in some respects. Like, it was okay against, your opponent's Gristlebrand or random big things, but Sting Scourger was always awkward to use and definitely not a card you ever were happy registering. It was just more or less your only out. So that wasn't very fun. Of course, then we got other things. Chieftain, which is basically just a bad war chief. It's a lot better now in certain formats, but not that great. Again, more or less ditto with Krenko. Krenko is very like high risk, high reward kind of thing. Same with Chieftain. Not really where you want to be though. Again, same with Instigator. I mean, you already had enough stuff to cheat. You really wanted more payoffs, and especially, you'd rather have your 2-mana guys actually do something other than just be a bad Goblin Lackey or Aether Vile or whatever. And of course, Kiki Jiki, again, sometimes played back in the day. Obviously, this card's pretty silly with Siege Gang, Ringleader, Matron, or even Mogg War Marshal. Pretty cool there. But again, this is a more higher risk, but maybe not super high risk anymore because there's so many guys, like copying just almost any of them would be really good. And of course, last but not least, and certainly not a goblin, is Cavern of Souls. Again, this is another fundamental part of these like super big creature heavy decks. Not always in Legacy, but typically like, for example, humans in Modern, or say like Sliver decks too in Modern or Legacy. Also play Cavern. Produces basically mana of any color to play for your creatures, and of course makes them uncounterable. Very good. So yeah, Cavern is pretty awesome. Again, this was like the biggest thing. So basically it was about 2007, got Mogg War Marshal, and then 2012, Cavern came out. Those were really, really good. These were like core parts of the deck and did help keep the deck relevant for a little bit longer than it normally would have been. All right. Yeah, flash forward to all of Wizards R&D getting hit by a bus. You know, it would have made more sense almost that they accidentally print mana drain or whatever, you know. That would be at least a little bit more believable. Like, oops, we actually printed mana drain into standard. Like, we accidentally mixed up the files, like a digital error or something, right? And like you could believe that would happen, and then they just ban it and everything be fine. You know, people wouldn't have really lost confidence in them. But like when you make so many mistakes in like the last 2 years, I mean, really more if we're talking about standard, but anyways, um, fortunately, there is an upside to all this rampant power creep and eternal specific sets. We got a bunch of goblins and a bunch of good ones. So the first one, I believe, would be our good friend Goblin Trashmaster. Normally, for a long time, we had to do with like things like Goblin Tinkerer or whatever, maybe Goblin Vandal, stuff like that, to deal with goblins, basically, that would deal with artifacts. These weren't particularly good. They were pretty weak. Trashmaster is awesome. It does two great things. First off, pumps your dude, so it's a lord, and so it's never dead, right? So typically lord effects aren't that great. However, in this respect, it's almost like, you know, the whole peanut butter and chocolate thing, because like destroying artifacts is pretty relevant against a bunch of different decks, as well as obviously being a lord is pretty good, but not something you really want to play for a 4-mana 3/3. But when you combine them both, it's pretty great. It's pretty great. So this guy gives you a little bit more resilience to Plague Engineer, which is pretty good. And then obviously destroys artifacts really cheaply and really easily. And speaking of which, then we have Crater Maker. This card is sweet. This guy did a really good job of, well, killing artifacts. Now he kills Plague Engineer. He kills random stuff like Ensnaring Bridge or Emrakul or Ugin. Any of the Ugins he nukes. And he's a 2-mana 2/2. Sometimes he just kills Delvers. Sometimes he blocks and kills Arcanists, Dreadhorde Arcanists. So that's pretty sweet. And then of course got Chain Whirler. This guy's very sweet. Not only is he a solid attacker, because you know, obviously 3-mana 3/3 first strike, but he finishes off random things like your opponent's planeswalkers. After combat, he'll deal a bunch of extra damage, 1 damage to your opponent. This thing does a little bit of everything, really powerful. Unfortunately, it's a little tricky to cast, which is kind of obnoxious. But this card is great, and most people never see it coming. This thing is pretty awesome. I'm a huge fan of Chain Whirler. It's great, but you know, obviously it's a little tricky to cast. And then, of course, big stuff, in Modern Horizons. So we got really important stuff here. Two hugely fundamental cards. Munitions Expert. Again, this is basically a Gem Palm Incinerator that you can play, and it counts itself. So it's an on curve answer basically. So like if you play a Lackey on turn 1, you can like Cavern Expert like their Flip Delver or something, and swing with your Lackey and drop in some big stupid thing, which is just, I mean, this is huge. You know, this is hugely impactful. This thing is just great. It has Flash natively, which is awesome. So you don't even have to vial it in. Typically, you'll do like a 3-1 split for like Incinerator and Expert. This is, I mean, you can't get much better than this thing is. This thing is really good. This is insanely good. Again, you know, just what the deck need, another you know, pseudo cantripping terminate. This thing terminates some shit. And even sometimes killing the planeswalkers can be kind of relevant too. Like sometimes you just random kill an Oko or whatever. So that's kind of cool. And then of course we have Sling Gang Lieutenant. This thing is very sweet. It gives you ability to basically like you can drain your opponents out for a bunch, which is good. Obviously the life gain and stuff is good against stuff like burn or whatever. Although you won't really face burn because it's just not like, why would you play burn when your opponents are playing like Uro and Oko and stuff? Like how do you, I mean, it's stupid. Burn's not very good. Because they can't beat those cards basically. But anyways, so Sling Gang helps a ton with the burn matchup and just the aggressive Delver matchups and just in general lets you kill basically about a turn earlier sometimes. Really, really powerful. It's a mana free way to give you some reach, some life gain. So very nice, very nice. Lets you keep your Vile on 4, so instead of having to go to 5 for Siege Gang. Pretty sweet, pretty sweet. Comes with a bunch of friends. I mean, this is great stuff. Great stuff. And last but not least, from also Modern Horizons, Patchlick Mons. This guy is kind of like think of it. It's probably better to think of it as like a Goblin Sharpshooter, but like a little more generalized, less specialized, with a higher floor, but probably a lower ceiling more or less. Because like Sharpshooter against like a lot of creature decks is kind of like a lock. You can basically kill all their X1s. You make combat like really, really miserable, but sometimes it just doesn't do a lot. Like if you like, you're trading guys and then like you rip a Sharpshooter. Sometimes your Sharpshooter just sits there for a couple turns while you're, draw more lands and it just doesn't do anything. So it can be kind of low impact at times. But Patchlick does have the dealing 1 damage thing. But if you have even just one other goblin, like over a couple of turns, you can deal extra damage. You can start making. You can do the Goblin Warrens thing where you take one random token and turn it into 2 more 1/1 tokens, and then turn those into 2 more 1/1s and dealing an extra damage each time, and so on. And of course, he can attack too. Pretty sweet. And of course, you can target him with your own Caracas, which is pretty useful. Pretty useful. So yeah, he's a bit better on average than something like Sharpshooter. Again, also not affected by Summoning Sickness, because typically you don't really play like in the Legacy versions of Goblins. You don't play like that many haste effects, like 2 or 3 depending. And of course, we've got Conspicuous Snoop. This is a very new card that came out in 2020. This thing had a lot of hype around him. Didn't play as well as other people had thought, but it did make the deck actually pretty good in Modern. So now it's like a kind of a aggro combo thing in Modern, because you can kind of do like the regular Goblins thing, but you can just go Conspicuous Snoop into Bogot Harbinger, and the Harbinger puts the Kiki Jiki on top, and then you copy the Snoop a million times because it has the Kiki Jiki ability, and then you sack it with Sling Gang Lieutenant. You copy the Harbingers the last time, and then you sack all of your Snoop copies. Or you can just make a million copies at end of turn, then untap with them, and then attack. So that's actually useful because that will let you kill them through a Plague Engineer, which is pretty nice. But yeah, like just 2019, 2020, even I guess 2018 really, because Dominaria and Dem19 came out in 2018. So really the last 2 years, we're getting a lot of really, really good Goblin cards. But that's not it. That's not all, actually. They actually went they went like full 2020 on this next guy. This thing is, you gotta see it to believe it. Oh yeah, that's right. Muxus, baby. This motherfucker is unreal. Absolutely unreal. I mean, 6 mana, 4/4, puts like 20 fucking mana's worth of goblins into play. It's just, and then it like also has like the pile driver ability to make it huge. This thing is awesome. Like when you people have to like start chumping with their Gristlebrand that they show and telled out, yeah, yeah. When you make show and tell symmetrical, um, yeah, that's this is a fucking messed up card. Um, I mean, even if you just hit like 2 cards, you get way more than 6 mana's worth. Um, Especially like 3 or more, and like if you hit like a matron, I mean, you were off to the races. This thing is crazy. makes Prospector really good too, because you can ramp into it with like say Mog War Marshal on turn 3. You can sack War Marshal the token and then the Prospector, and then you can like tap Cavern to other lands and just drop Muxus, and it's just absurd. Totally absurd. Of course, you can drop it off Lackey on turn 2. I mean, this thing is insane. Absolutely insane. Uh, its thing played way better than I think pretty much anyone originally had seen. It is just, I mean, and sometimes you'll even like I remember used to go up to 6 on my Vile to Violin Rorik's Bladewing. You know, that 6 mana 6/5 legendary dragon with flying and haste or whatever from Onslaught, because it was like a way to avoid like plague and stuff like in mono red. Just be another way to like avoid like ground stalls and other traditional goblin hate cards. So you just violin your, you know, Rorik's Bladewing. This is a little better than Rorik's Bladewing, unfortunately. But yeah, this dude is he's certainly well deserving of his noble creature type. Um, this dude is totally nuts, totally nuts. I mean, you can actually have a turn 2 kill if you drop it off Lackey if you hit. I mean, like it's like 1% or whatever. But the fact you even have like a turn 2 kill available, like in this kind of situation, is pretty crazy. It just involves War Marshal, Patchlick Mons, Sling Gang, and I think you have to hit like 1 or 2 other guys. But yeah, so like everything you sack will do 2 damage. So if you have 10 things, yeah, it's pretty ridiculous, So yeah, yeah. So I mean, I guess a slight aside. I don't mind when like we get like these super insanely pushed 2020 cards, in as much as that they make you build your deck in a certain way. Like there's actual deck building costs. Like obviously Muxus has a deck building cost, right? You know, so like this is I think more interesting to have like say a Muxus or even like a Primeval Titan kind of card or something like that. You know, Dryad of the Elysian Grove, because it's like, okay, you have to build around it to get like the full value out of it. So you have like different decks or whatever. Whereas, you know, you see something like Oko or whatever, and it's just like, play blue and green cards and put me in your deck. Like, I mean, that's not that interesting, right? It's pretty dumb. It's really boring. It really homogenizes things. And also the games like kind of take forever sometimes. Whereas with Muxus, the games are awesome and interesting. Well, interesting for one person at least. But speaking of deck lists, all right. So you can actually play in Historic, which is an arena format. You can actually play Muxus, and why? I have no idea why, but you can. So yeah, we got this guy. Here's just again, this is just a sample deck list. Some of these decks play black for things like Thoughtseize or whatever, which is probably what you should be doing. But I'm not 100% sure what's better. You do get more tools like Call the Death Dweller, which is pretty sweet with Chain Whirler. But the rest of the decks will look 90% the same, you know, not a big difference there. But yeah, this deck is sweet. This deck is basically just, I mean, sometimes you'll just do Goblin stuff, but typically you just want to cheat out Muxus and then with a haste enabler and then smash them for a billion. Alternatively, you can just Krenko people out, like play a bunch of random, like you have 8 haste enablers, so turn 3 haste enabler, turn 4 Krenko, crank it out. I don't know. I'm sorry. Was that like a bad pun? I'll probably make it again. Anyways, the Krenko is actually really good in this deck because it just immediately adds to your board, adds more to like this sort of combo potential. Sometimes it's only one activation you need. Sometimes it's multiple, but yeah, this this is sweet. It's definitely one of the better decks, including something like the Jones Sacrifice, sort of aristocrats style decks, Mayhem Devil with the cat oven thing, and then also the Sultai decks are pretty good in historic too. The basically Uro plus a bunch of interactive spells, right? So yeah, this thing is pretty sweet. And of course you even have Castle Embereth, which is really, really great here because it just turns your random stupid fucking guys, like if they deal with all your stuff, you actually have like a real clock because you just have these random dudes that you can just pump with your castle. So I really like Castle here, and if Ken, Phyrexian Tower is a pretty good card, right? It's a good card when you have like with Wily Goblin plus Phyrexian Tower. That's like so much mana for free. I love it. So, anyways, this is just one of a pretty typical list of mono red goblins in our new favorite format, historic, because you can play goblins in it. So obviously it's going to be great. All right, here we go. Now we got basically the modern take on the Goblins deck. Again, typical Goblin stuff, um, but we have the Bogart Harbinger Conspicuous Snoop combo. And of course, main deck discard, because discard is great when you just take their one relevant spell, then Snoop, and then Harbinger them, and GG. So yeah, you can have like turn 3 wins against uninteractive decks, which is really, really nice. This is really useful against stuff like Tron or whatever, which can be like, too fast, to grind out or whatever. They can have trumps like Ugin or O-Stone, stuff like that. But anyways, yeah, Harbinger, pretty good. Yeah, there's not much to say here. Is again, you'll do some typical Goblin stuff. Sometimes you'll try and grind them out a little bit. Again, Snoop is just a fine card by itself. It's a Grizzly Bear that lets you play Goblins off the top, as well as again, sometimes you can, if you have like a Kiki, or not, excuse me, not Kiki Jiki, but if you have like a Krenko on top, that's kind of cool. You can tap it to make a bunch of extra tokens. Pretty sweet. Um, yeah, this is super cool. This is a pretty sweet deck. And of course, we have everyone's favorite, of course, Legacy Goblins, where you get to play all of the cards. Well, almost all of them. Can't believe Recruiter, but can't win them all, right? Again, this is typical Goblins list, what we'll see these days. This is, I believe this is Goblin Lackey 1. He streams a lot on Twitch and has videos on YouTube and stuff. Pretty famous Goblins players, has done a lot in last couple, I think he's been playing the last few years. Done a lot of work on the deck, obviously. Sometimes we have main deck Karakas, sometimes Karakas is in the sideboard. I don't know which one I like more. I do kind of like main deck Karakas. Again, it's just nice to have even like pre-board having extra stuff against like Gristlebrand or stuff like that. Obviously, Karakas does a pretty cool stuff with Muxus. If you miss with your Muxus, which is great because like at the if you're casting a Muxus and then like you whiff, you can return it to your hand, and then like the next one you'll probably be guaranteed to hit it big. But yeah, this is again typical Lackey, Vile, Waste, Port, Red Splash, of course, for Sling Gang, as well as Munitions Expert, bunch of 2 targets, 3 Ringlers, War Chiefs. I mean, this is like, because there's so many good cards you want to play, but then you also have to pay attention to curve considerations. So, like that's why we don't have like a million Ringleaders, because you're playing Muxus, so your deck gets a little too dirtily, and obviously you can't always count on your Lackey hitting or having a time with Aether Vile. So you gotta think about your curve. Also, for example, the proliferation of Plague Engineer, even main decks and some decks, makes you definitely want to say like, well, I probably don't want that many Mog War Marshals, but more Crater Makers, things like that. So there's a lot going on here, but this is pretty much what we'll see. Of course, always 4 Lackey, always 4 Matron, always 4 Vile. Some number of waste ports, caverns, fetches, mountains, badlands, that kind of stuff. Yeah, so yeah, pretty much nothing here is, that's too weird. Nothing's too weird. Again, sideboard mostly based upon beating, like, well, the unfair decks. And then a couple other cards for the fair decks, things like Pyrokinesis, because this card is just absolutely backbreaking against fair matchups. Um, I'm actually not sure why he has Sting Scourger and the sideboard. I think he must have been testing it out. I don't think there's any reason to be playing Sting Scourger these days. Um, I think this is an old list too. I think maybe a month or so old. Hard, I can't remember, something like that. Again, surgicals, rebs, needles, traps, cage, chalice. There's all sorts of anti combo stuff. Unfortunately, there's all sorts of different combo stuff, like, you know, Show and Tell and Reanimator. Cracks is good, but, you know, you'll need like additional cards. So Needle kind of sort of hits sort of all of the combo decks. Like, you can hit Sneak Attack or Gristlebrand in the Show and Tell decks, or you can hit Wishclaw Talisman in the Test decks. So it does have some value pretty much everywhere. Same thing with Cage against like Elves, or also against Reanimator. So you really want some overlap, but you still want some powerful cards. So it's always hard to figure out what exactly would be the best, right? But yeah, this is typically what you'd expect. Pretty much a recent Goblins list to look like. Pretty sweet. Lots of really cool stuff here. Definitely really fun. I mean, you can lackey into Muxus. Like, that is super fun. That's super exciting. Like, nothing else really compares. Not even close. But yeah, so that's pretty much it. All sorts of cool stuff, interesting stuff going on. Goblins definitely making a comeback after years of not a lot going on, which is okay, you know. Um, all things wax and wane, you know. I mean, shit, we're doing better than Zoo. Uh, yeah, that's depressing. Let's not talk about Wild Nicottle. That'll make me sad. That'll make me real sad. But we're sitting high. We're doing pretty well these days. We got, because, you know, this is a true Eternal format. We got all those stupid mistakes of cards that they printed, like Pyroblast and Pyrokinesis and stuff like that. Um, Caracas, you know, things that'll definitely give us a leg up that we wouldn't really have available in other formats, which is great. You know, uh, thankfully they made those mistakes and we can live with them forever. Good stuff, good stuff. So definitely fighting the good fight. Definitely having a lot of fun now, being able to play with these cards again. Um, Man, it's been pretty nice. If there's only one good thing about 2019 2020 cards, it's that Goblins is a deck again. So there you go. Um, so yeah, definitely coming out of their caves, definitely getting some stuff going on. Pretty sweet. So that's it for today, guys. So thanks for stopping by and have a great day.